So it's 6 o'clock. So I think we'll get started. We've almost got 100 people with us, but obviously people can jump in as they like. The webinar is going to run for an hour. So we've got an hour basically to grill Lael on her, her Colombian trip. And just to give you guys a really quick overview on Komoot, I'm guessing that most of you have already used the app for yourself. But one of the main things that we focus on is really exploration and discovery and helping people find those super nice places when they travel outside. And Lael's going to share a little bit on how she's used Komoot for some of her own route planning with us this evening. But just to get us started, Lael, maybe you could give us a quick intro to yourself and this project.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Lael Wilcox. I'm an ultra-endurance cyclist. First started by just traveling on the bike and then started ultra-distance racing about 5 years ago. So I just feel really passionate about exploring new places, also being close to home, racing as far as I can, and then basically just connecting places on the map, looking at a place and thinking, can I go there? What would it be like along the way? So actually the first ride I did with Komoot, I was flying to California, the coast, to pick up a new bike from Specialized. And then I was like, I want to fly to Specialized, and then I want to get a new bike and ride it 1,000 miles back to Tucson, Arizona, where I was living. So I just plugged in the 2 spots on the map. Komoot made me a great route, and then I just followed it without knowing anything I'd see along the way. So I don't know, the idea that you can get these routes by not knowing, by having some help, by not, looking over things so deeply, and then just getting to go out and have an adventure and have some assistance along the way. It's been super cool. So that was, I think, about 3 years ago. And then it's just been a huge part of kind of my daily rides, just finding different ways to get places and then planning longer distance routes and also sharing those with others. So the project we're talking about tonight is a route building project we did in Colombia this January and February. And this was a project with Conservation International and bikepacking.com. So the idea was to go down to Colombia and then design like a week-long bikepacking route from Bogota into the Paramos, which is a high elevation cloud forest that captures all the drinking water for Bogota, and then come back around and visit the communities along the way. And the idea was to make it all dirt, make it as scenic and beautiful as possible, and then visit conservation sites along the way. So you could both see what the communities are doing and see the work that Conservation International is doing in Colombia. So kind of exploration, learning, and then discovering new places. So we spent 6 weeks working on that route with a group of about 8 total. And then we met locals in Bogota that could help us with some of the routing, help us get access to communities. And then in the end, we ended up with about a 300, or let's see, I think it's about a 430 kilometer bikepacking route. And at the end of the project, we'd scouted everything together as a group. And then I went back and rode the route as fast as I could. So I did a time trial, which was self-supported, 39 hours, and it was, I think, 36,000 feet of climbing. So that's something like, 12,000 meters. It was insane. But yeah, so then we did all of this project. Rue is along to document everything, and then she'll put together a video to kind of show the work we did and show the area, encourage both locals and outsiders to come and ride this route and see it for themselves, start thinking about what it takes to build routes, the conservation work that happens along the way, and then just having this freedom to just see it for yourself.
Well, that sounds amazing. So you rode it in 39 hours. How long would you recommend other people riding it if they wanted to do more of a tour, for example?
Yeah, I'd say really to take time and enjoy it, to be there for about a week, maybe 5 to 7 days. then that gives you the opportunity to camp along the way, to meet people in the communities, to be more involved than just riding straight through. And you get to see everything in daylight too. So that's but yeah, I liked both though. It was, it's like this kind of cultural experience. And then after that, this really big physical challenge. And it's like, if I can go to a place and do both, then I feel like I'm getting a richer experience for myself.
And is that what you did? Were you camping along the way, or did you stay in any accommodation?
We did both. Colombia is a little trickier for camping because it's so forested, so many trees. It's so fertile that there aren't a lot of wide open places just to camp. So if anything, it would be, maybe going to a farm and asking if we could put our tents up there. There were a few spots that were a little more open, but we also just went to communities and stayed in hotels and guest houses because that was sometimes easier to find. And it's not so remote. You're never too far from the next village. I think village or town, usually about 30 to 50K. So these are reasonable distances you could make in a day, and then go there, have some nice meals, get some good rest. The other kind of tricky part was that their daylight is the same all year round. It's 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. That's your daylight hours because it's so close to the equator. So I really like riding in places that have longer daylight because you can cover more distance, especially touring. But there it's like we'd like to find a place to sleep by around 5 o'clock just to know where we were going to be. So it was a balance of a little camping, probably more staying in places, but then that also gave you opportunities to get to know these little towns that all have courtyards with churches and bakeries and really, really cool areas.
So which was your best night you had on the trip?
Oh man, that's a tough one. One night we camped very close to paramos, close to one of the forests, the cloud forest, and that was probably the coolest because we got to see all these incredible plants near sunset and then wake up to them as well. And honestly, maybe my best night was actually when I rode through the night on the time trial. We rode through Chingaza National Park, and when the sun comes down, all this mist comes in. And it's like this, that's like where the water comes from that fuels the whole city. But it's this mist that you can hardly see like a foot in front of your face. It just comes straight in. And then my light just kind of penetrating that and just to kind of ride through that. It's like riding through a cloud. It was incredible. Just how much it can change from day to night.
Wow, that sounds really surreal with the mist coming in like that. Was that ever like, how was that riding? Was it ever unnerving, or did you feel like the visibility was okay?
It was okay. As soon as I rode out of that forest, then it just opened up. It was like there was no more condensation. So it was just weird it's like for 2 hours, I'm kind of riding through this mist, and then I climb up a little higher and then it's gone. So that was very different, very weird experience, but also really cool. You feel like you're in the landscape. You start understanding how this water network happens. Typically, there it's like I don't totally recommend riding at night, but it was a cool experience for sure.
Yeah. And I thought we'd just click into this slide so we can see that you were riding, is it a hardtail mountain bike?
Yes.
Is that the type of bike that you think would be like best for this route?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there were a few gear options for this that were kind of important. It was having a hardtail with a suspension fork was really nice because some of the roads are pretty rough. I actually started the trip with this drop bar bike, and then Rue was with me and she had a flat bar bike, and I used that for the time trial just because it's so steep that it was hard to have control. So I'd say hardtail, flat bar, suspension fork, and really good brakes and super easy gears. We were running like the easiest gears, but because you're just crawling up these mountainsides. And then when you're descending, it's like you're just flying down. So you don't really care about your gears. And then I guess having like as light of a setup as possible because of all the climbing. it's just unavoidable. Anywhere you go in Colombia, you're just going to be either going up or down. But that gives you a lot of different vantage points, and it's really beautiful.
And what percentage of the route would you say is off-road? Were you touching roads at all?
A little bit, but not too much. A bit coming in and out of Bogota. That was probably the hardest aspect of designing a good route, because it's such a big city. It's 8 million people. And then just designing routes in cities is challenging for cycling. There's more traffic, there are more options, just knowing where to go. So we actually had a couple of friends, really one guy, Juan Pablo, that gave us a ton of routing advice. And then it was also cool because the route leaves town and enters back into town on paved roads, but both of them are like historic cycling routes. We were actually there for the Tour of Colombia, and the day before, or 2 days before my time trial, I watched the final stage go up the same climb that's the beginning of our route. So we're there, and there are like 1,000 people there and all these professional cyclists. And then 2 days later, I started at 2 a.m. with like 3 other local Colombians, and there was nobody there at all. So it's like you get to do kind of these famous rides, but then at your own pace, doing your own thing. So, yeah. So a little pavement, but mostly dirt, and mostly either up or down.
Right. Someone's asking if they can see your route in Komoot, and yes, you can. So Lael turned the whole route into a collection, and actually if you scan this QR code, it will take you straight in, so you can check it out for yourself. And then also if you jump into Lael's profile, you can see what other riding she's been up to. I also have your stats there, Lael. So 262 miles, the whole route, with 36,000 feet of climbing. So yeah, a lot of elevation.
Yeah. And it's not totally right. So part of this project is that we're trying to gain access for cyclists through Chingaza National Park, which is the largest paramos close to Bogota. And right now it's a beautiful dirt road, but it's closed to riders because for safety reasons. They feel like something could happen to someone out there. So we're working with the park to make some kind of permit for cyclists to ride through. And we plan that this will be ready in October, which should be great timing for the route to be open again, as right now it's the wet season, so it wouldn't be good riding. But then by then you could gain permission to ride through, and it should be a bit drier too. So this was another piece of advocacy work that went into establishing this route, something that I didn't expect to be working on, but also really exciting. The park's really excited to have more people come in and see what they do. And then cyclists have been dying to ride this road because it's just magnificent, but it's closed for now. So hopefully we can work together to kind of reopen that.
Cool. Dave's actually asking, did you ever feel like there was a safety concern whilst you were out on the route?
I didn't. But what I did feel were like a lot of locals asking us if we were safe, just because they kind of grew up in a different time when things weren't safe, when Colombia had curfews and when people didn't travel far from home, when a lot of people knew family members that had been kidnapped by communist guerrillas or by narco traffickers. And there has been a peace agreement, so things are actually very safe now. But I feel like people are hesitant to kind of go out there. There's a bit of resistance of, can we do this? Is this okay? Just because they have memories of things not being good. So, it's like we never had any issues. People were so kind to us and helpful. But we did meet this like constant idea of, well, maybe you should have a vehicle following you at all times, and you should have a security guard and things like that. And that really would change the ride a lot. Of course, safety is definitely a priority, but we did ride alone and we were totally fine. So I think safety wasn't an issue. That's always something to consider, but I feel like a lot is changing in Colombia, and I feel like it's a good time for people to feel a little more freedom, a little more adventure, because things are a lot better than they were.
So I have a question for you then. How is your Spanish going?
Oh boy. Oh, it was actually getting better understanding. Because I do speak French, so I would just try to understand and try to speak. And there was one other guy in our group that would try, but everybody else would just like kind of rely on me. And then I would just be pantomiming with my hands and saying, we want to go here, we want to go there. And, and then I look at them, I'm like, give me some help here. And they're just like looking at their plates of food. But you know what? Sometimes you just can't be embarrassed to make mistakes. I mean, I'm sure I said all kinds of crazy stuff, but it doesn't matter. That's the other thing. People were so kind and like helping, or not making fun of me for the things I said. They didn't care. They weren't tough about it. They're like, oh, you want to do this? And they do anything they could to help. So I was lucky, but I'm sure I looked so silly.
Did you have a go-to Spanish phrase that got you by?
I don't know. No.
It's all gone.
I was not brave to ask that, but you went for it, Gabby.
I feel like I always end up, if I can't speak a word of a language and I go somewhere, I always end up with one phrase that I seem to repeat over and over again, to pretend that I'm, at least makes me feel a bit more polite. So if you did this ride again, Elizabeth's asking, is there anything that you'd do differently?
Well, I want to so another part of the project is we're trying to have a group start on the route next January or February. Of course, everything is kind of up in the air right now, but the idea would be to have something like 100 riders meet in Bogota to all start the ride together. And then everybody can go their own pace. It's not a race, but then just to kind of encounter people along the way. So that's another reason why I'd like to go back and ride it again, just to do that, just to see like more cycling life on the route, and to also kind of work with the communities to establish places where people can camp or places where people can stay or have meals, and kind of set up a network like that. And then just see kind of that develop. This was like another goal of Conservation International, because part of conservation is having kind of a strong economic system where people don't necessarily have to farm, don't have to use the land to make money. So a big threat in this area is that people are kind of destroying the paramos to like make potato fields or to grow other vegetables. But instead, it's like if cyclists are coming through, they could be providing like lodging, or they could be providing meals, and then that would help the conservation effort, because then the forest can go back to reclaiming the land. So I think like this idea of like establishing a route and then having like some kind of economy build up along the way, and then this exchange between cyclists and locals, I'd love to see that, and I'd love to see it grow. I'd love to see people having these interactions, and then see what kind of comes from that. So I'd like to come back and do that. And then another reason I'd like to go back is just we made so many good friends there, and they were so good to us. And I mean, these 4 guys rode me out of town on my time trial, and we rode through like a climb out of town, and then all rode through watching the moon together, and they rode with me until like 8 the next morning. So, it's like to go back and visit them, to do more riding with them. And there's just so much like heart for it there. So I definitely want to go back. And then I also look at it, and I look at the map, and I'm like, I only saw like this tiny little part of Colombia. And that's the only area I've seen in all of South America. So then you start imagining like, well, what about the coffee growing region? What about the coast? What about all these other places you could go? So it's like to kind of extend the route. I'd love to do that and just kind of check it out.
How did you make the initial connection with Conservation International?
They actually first got in touch with Logan Watts from bikepacking.com, because there are four workers from Conservation International that applied for a grant to get money to make a bikepacking route somewhere in the world. They hadn't focused on Colombia, but they're like, we think this would be a great way to kind of encourage people to see conservation work on their own. In the past, they've done more kind of guided trips for donors so people can see the work they're doing, but they're like, this could be available to the public at large. So they got the grant, and then they're like, well, we're cyclists, but we don't know how to build routes. So then they got in touch with Logan because he has a website sharing routes around the world. So they started working together, and then they focused in on Colombia. I think they work in something like 15 countries. But Colombia, because Bogota is so close to its watershed, and because cycling is already such a big part of the culture. And then they're like, okay, Logan's going to make the route in Colombia with these different places. And then Logan was like, well, we should have somebody along to make a media project about this. So then he invited Rue and I to come on board with the team to make a video and then also give the route more exposure. And so that's how we got involved about a month before the project started, which was such a cool opportunity. I was like, I want to go to Colombia. I've never been to South America. I didn't know anything about it. And then, a month later, I'm in the middle of the biggest city looking at the mountains thinking, what's this going to be all about? So really cool that it could all come together. And then the route project becoming bigger, working on local advocacy through the national park and all these other details. And then all the locals getting excited about bikepacking and kind of wanting to help make this happen was really exciting for us.
Cool. I love this picture, actually. There's so many people on bikes. It's crazy.
So this is their ciclovia. This is every Sunday from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. They close something like 80 kilometers of the biggest streets, the most traffic streets in Bogota, and then people can ride them or walk or do whatever. So cyclists just take over the streets, all ages, from all backgrounds. And we actually met the guy who started this in 1974. His name is Jaime Ortiz, and we met up with him to interview him and have coffee. He started as like him with like 5 friends, believing that this is something Bogota should do to stop all the pollution and to kind of change the way of life. And then it's flourished into where over 1 million people ride every Sunday. It's incredible just to see. So that was one of our cool experiences in Bogota.
Yeah, that's amazing. I feel like every city should jump on board with that.
I know. Can you imagine if all your streets, like just one day a week, were closed off and then all you saw were cyclists? It's like this utopia. So cool to see.
I was just going to say the same, yeah.
A few people are asking, actually, if you could give us a run through of the kit that you had with you on your trip.
Yeah, so we actually brought a tent just because the weather is so kind of iffy. It rains a lot there. So we had a small 2-person tent. What else? Rain gear, clothing. And then I was carrying more equipment than I've ever carried on a trip because we had all this video equipment. So I was carrying a drone and a tripod and a stabilizer in a backpack. I think Rue was carrying 2 cameras and 3 lenses, but we didn't even bring a cook stove. Like, we can't carry any more weight. So we have all these like video cameras, and then we're eating Snickers, and otherwise we kept it super light. But we expected to see a grocery store somewhere to buy food every day or every other day. So it wasn't that equipment intensive. We tried to keep the bikes light just because it's just so hard. The riding's just so hard.
What sort of temperature is it?
I think it was probably between like, I don't know, something like 60 degrees in the day. I don't know what that is in Celsius. And then 40s at night. So pretty moderate, never too cold. I think we saw frost a couple of the nights. But not too bad. We were riding in shorts and t-shirts every day.
Okay. Okay.
And it's humid too, so that kept it pretty consistently warm. Pretty sweaty.
Nice. Um, we've also got another question from Dave, who's interested to know if you encountered any wildlife, in particular at night, whilst you were riding.
I don't think so. I'm trying to think. Oh, so many birds. An incredible amount of birds. Like you'd hear them singing all day and night, or sometimes kind of screaming. And then, but no bigger animals, I don't think. Yeah, I think it was just birds, really.
Nothing threatening then, or nothing
No.
too exotic. Cool. So I guess you were quite remote for a lot of your trip. I was wondering if you had any good hacks that you could share to make sure you were able to navigate the whole time whilst you were riding.
Yeah, I think power was a bigger issue for us because we also had to charge all the camera equipment. So I carried a couple of extra power banks, cache batteries. I also had a dynamo charger that was wired into my light running from my front hub. And then I guess we would just try to, maybe stay somewhere every other night or so just to charge everything. But we never really ran out. It worked out okay. But yeah, I mean, the bulk of the weight we were carrying on the bikes was electronic equipment, and that's different rides kind of require different equipment. I usually carry a couple extra batteries too while racing because I'm not always expecting to be able to charge. I use a Wahoo Roam for navigation, and then I also have my phone and sometimes some other things. I use electronic shifting as well, so I usually carry 1 or 2 power banks just so I can keep everything charged. And then it's a system of plugging them into my light to charge and kind of knowing how everything is. But you can really get pretty far off of that, just depending on your power needs. But running a GPS instead of running Komoot on my phone definitely saved some power for sure.
Cool. And Michael's asking, were you using Komoot to plan the route or to record the route whilst you were riding?
I was not responsible for planning this route, so I actually was using it to record and then have more data. Logan was in charge of planning the route from the outset, and then when we'd run into issues along the way, like locked gates or private property, because you can't plan everything in advance, we would look back at our options and kind of rework the route. So then if you look at my collection, there are quite a few different versions of the route, just because we're like, well, it has to be legal, it has to be safe, and then what's the best option? What's the best way we could go? So we kind of looked at different ways to ride. So a little bit of both, but definitely for recording, because we want to be able to share this too.
And someone's asking as well, are there any particularly memorable connections that you made with the locals that stand out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So previous slide had a picture of 2 guys kind of looking at the computer, looking at route options. And those were 2 of my favorite people in the whole country. One is Juan Pablo. He's an owner of local bike shops there. I think he has about 8 shops. And he's just such a passionate rider. His father was a professional cyclist in the 50s, raced the Tour of Colombia, and now he's just doing all these exploration trips. And anything that we needed help with, he was like, oh, I can make that connection. I know those people. And the other guy was Julian, and he's a young guy that also makes media. He's really passionate about birding. So those 2 helped make routes, were along for the ride, helped us make connections with locals. And I've never received that kind of support before. And they both promised that they'll try to beat my fast time on the route too. So I'm excited to see that. Neither of them have ever ridden that far. So to see this kind of like spark of excitement, like I'm going to go do it and see what my experience is like. That's so exciting for me, because then they'll come back and we can talk about it, and it'll be totally different, because every ride, depending on the season or the day, it's like, or when you pass through a town or an area, you're going to see something entirely different, but you have that common experience of traveling the same road, but maybe, everything else could be different about it. So, yeah, definitely those two. And in general, people were just so kind to us and helpful. So we're excited to go back when we can.
Did you have any like big surprises on the trip, or anything that you just didn't expect in Colombia?
I mean, I didn't know what to expect going in. I guess I didn't realize how hard it was going to be. Everybody said when we got there, they're like, you're going to ride this route, that's going to kill you. And then I was like, well, we'll just see how it goes. We can always take our time and everything like that. But, we were covering less than 50K a day, and everybody was just toast. And that's just not normal. It's like you spend all day out there, you should be able to get a little farther. But it was just such challenging, steep, loose riding. So that was a bit of a surprise. And then I guess just the different challenges of establishing the route and then kind of overcoming those in such a short amount of time was really surprising. It's like you want to ride through this park, then you meet with the park officials and then try to set up a plan for the future. It's like, I guess I was surprised by how many people wanted to make it work. It's like a lot of the time you run into issues with bureaucracy and people are just saying, no, like this is impossible. We're not interested in there. I think because they have such a strong cycling culture, everybody wanted to make it work. So that was really cool. Other than that, I guess something pretty surprising was the change from this huge city of 8 million spread out. And then within like an hour of riding, you could be totally out of town. I mean, you climb up about 1,000 meters, but then there's nothing there. It's just like this wild landscape. So that transition was really amazing. And then you could see a view of the city, but basically just in nature. That was a cool part of it.
Cool. So also this food looks pretty good.
This is really good. Yeah. This is actually, there's a media group there called Where Next. And they make videos about getting outside, different tourist ideas, biking, and they have like staff meals, I think at least 3 times a week, where they have a cook come in and make a delicious meal. So they invited us to come for that. This was local soup. I don't remember what it was called, but it's chicken and capers and rice and avocados and potatoes. And that was a lot of the food. It was a lot of chicken and potatoes, very hearty, but really pretty healthy too. Good cycling food.
Yeah. Have you got anything that you like really rely on when you're on a big tour that you really like to eat?
Oh man, I don't know. It seems to change everywhere. It's like, well, what do locals eat? They ate a lot of arepas. So it's like these cornmeal discs with like cheese inside.
Right.
Or they eat empanadas. So those are like pastries stuffed with meat or potatoes or sometimes sweets. So we'd eat a lot of those as kind of like pack food.
I've heard you've got a bit of a thing for ice cream, Lael. Is that true?
Favorite. You can't pack it. That's the worst. You can't save it for later. You have to eat it right then. And, it's like I can't carry enough ice creams. I wish everything was ice cream, instead of eating these, pastries, let's just eat ice cream. But yeah, it doesn't keep, maybe I need to build a little cooler on the bike or something.
Cool. I'm an ice cream fan too. So Dave's also asking, Lael's obviously a rock star on the bike. What about for your average weekend warrior? If you're not used to that kind of altitude, what should we expect?
Yeah, I think for everybody coming in, you definitely need at least, 3 days at altitude before heading out on the trip. For us too, it's like we got in there, and then even just like walking up the stairs, I'd get short of breath. But yeah, I definitely think like a little time to kind of get used to it, at least 3 days, maybe up to a week, because most of the route is, above 10,000 feet. That's pretty high. There's not much oxygen up there. So giving yourself a little breathing room is good for sure.
Did you feel any effects of did you get any altitude sickness or anything, or did you find it okay?
I didn't, but I'd get a little lightheaded, I think. It's at some altitude, maybe like 12,000 feet, I just start feeling kind of goofy, like mentally just kind of out of it, which wasn't terrible, but it's like, then you have to kind of be ready because a storm could come in, something could happen. So just, I guess, getting a little used to that. Everybody responds differently, though. I don't think anybody in our group got sick, and the Colombians are just used to it. They just power up every mountain. But yeah, it's definitely something to kind of consider and spend a little extra time to account for.
Have you ever, maybe not necessarily in Colombia, but have you ever made like a really big route planning mistake?
Ooh, I helped work on this route called the Baja Divide down the Baja Peninsula in Mexico, and we scouted all of that by bike. So we actually ended up riding like 4,000 miles to make a 1,700 mile route. And a lot of that was like from afar, you can't tell how these roads, the roads look like they connect and then they don't. So you'd end up riding like 50K one direction and then realize that the road washed out and then have to turn around and ride all the way back. And that's just like that. It'd be so kind of frustrating because it's like you put in all this effort and everything's going great. It's beautiful. This is going to be so good. And then it turns out it's a dead end, or it turns out it ends up at like a locked fence, or just different reasons why routing doesn't work. But I guess the thing is, it's like, well, you could just at that point ride back and give up, or you could just realize that's part of the process and go back and, figure out another way. I've also in races ridden the wrong direction. Like one of my first race, I rode this single track route in the night, and then I slept by the side of the trail, woke up the next morning, started riding again. And then an hour, I think maybe 2 hours into my ride, I ended up in the same town I'd passed through the night before.
Oh.
I just went backwards for 2 hours, and then all you can do is just turn around and go back 2 hours. So it's like I spent 6 hours on this same stretch, and this is a race. And then you're like, oh no, like, and I'm like sleep deprived. So I'm like, well, I could have just slept an extra 4 hours instead of doing that, but then it's just like, that's what it is. Cause it's like, well, what are you going to do? Like sit on the side of the road and have a fit about it? It's like, just move on. I think I just started laughing because I was like, this is ridiculous, and like, I'm kind of like, I'm so sore and kind of grouchy. And then I realize I'm in the same town again. Like, oh man, but everybody does it. That's part of it. Everybody makes mistakes. It's like, you're going to do it. And the faster you can get over it, the better off you are. Because otherwise you're just going to like mentally dwell on that all day and be like, oh, I made this mistake. And it's like, well, 20 hours later, it doesn't matter. You are where you are. That's how it goes. But I guess that's just part of it. It may be a frustrating aspect, but it happens. It's okay.
Cool. I was also wondering, are there any cyclists out there that you yourself look up to or take inspiration from?
Oh, other cyclists. I guess I'd have to think about that.
That's a tough question.
Yeah, sorry, Lael. You don't have to answer.
I'm just trying to, I guess I just, even just seeing people, like not necessarily with their accomplishments, but this like kind of shared feeling of just being excited to be out riding. It's like no matter the distance, like you pass people commuting around town, or you pass people on trips, or or they get in touch, or, that kind of that full of heart riding. I guess that's something that inspires me to keep going, is that other people like find kind of passion for it as they ride too, and excitement. Even like, and then it brings you together with people around the world that you would never have met otherwise. It's like I've spent several months in Switzerland now, because initially a friend of mine, Willie, asked me to come over to do his 1,000-kilometer race. And now it's like he's one of my best friends in the world. And then last summer I was visiting him in Switzerland, and Emma Pooley, an ex-Olympian, writes, and she's like, hey, let's get together and ride. And it's like the same kind of energy of like people coming in like like-minded, riding together, and then that leads to so many more ideas. So I think, that's kind of what keeps me fired up about it. But specifically, I don't know. That's too tough,
Okay, I'll ask you an easy one. Someone else is asking, what's the longest you've ever ridden without showering?
17 days.
Wow. How did that smell?
My hair was like one dreadlock. It was terrible. Oh my God. It was like all woven together. It was the first time I raced the Tour Divide. I didn't shower the whole race. I was so kind of stubborn. I was like, well, if I shower, that's going to waste time. So I'm just not going to shower. I don't think I slept inside the whole time either. Like a wild animal. Man, never again though. It's disgusting. I just had like layers of filth, just dirt.
Did you conserve the clothes, or did you throw them in?
I think I kept them. Oh, that's bad.
Brutal. But there was actually a very good question as well, and I also asked it for myself. There's a girl, Gabri, who's saying, I've ridden a few 200-kilometer routes, mostly ride around 100 Ks. But I also often have trouble motivating myself while halfway to continue on longer trips. Do you have any tips for motivating yourself? And I have the same question in terms of like, I did like 200, or like I did DK,
right.
And like other trips. And I'm like, how does she motivate herself to, like, for example, finish? And how did you finish like Silk Road? That was like impressive. You know what I mean? Why? How? Tell me.
No, that was a really awesome ride. Well, I don't know. Now I have a few newer tricks, because I've been doing so much of this that like I'll listen to music, like pop music, if I'm feeling down. And then I'm like, all of a sudden kind of feel like I'm in a workout class, just having fun. Or I'll listen to audiobooks. And then especially like if I have to ride through the night, because I'll get so interested in the story that I'll stay awake and like be alert enough. Other things are just like, well, think about the alternative. If you quit in the middle of Kyrgyzstan, like, what are you going to do? Like hang out in somebody's yurt until you like decide to keep riding. Like sometimes you're so remote that it's like the alternative is like literally sitting on the side of the road. And I don't want to do that. And then I'll be mad they wasted time. So,
I remember the comment that you said in DK last year, and I have it on my head for longer routes as well. And it's actually thanks to you that I keep forward a lot of times. It's like, what would you do different if you would not be pedaling? Would you be just sitting on your desk and your computer, or like not doing anything? Or would you prefer being outdoors and pedaling? And even now on lockdown days, I'm like, oh, she's so right. Like, yeah. I'll prefer for anything else right now in the world, to be outside of pedaling instead of just sitting on my desk. So when I struggle a bit, I think on that comment, and I'm like, I should keep pedaling,
Right. Or the other thing is like, if you're feeling really bad, it's like, maybe just give yourself like half an hour and an hour. Be like, okay, I'll just check in an hour, because like, you're not going to solve it sitting on your bike feeling miserable. Like you still might feel bad for the next hour, but then an hour later you check the time, you're like, oh, I'm actually fine now. Or I'm like moved on to something else. It's like, there's like, don't feel bad about feeling bad. I mean, that sounds weird, but yeah. And then think all the time you spent dreaming about this ride before you went there. It's like at some point you thought it was a good idea. That's why you ended up there. And then it's like, well, why would you stop in the middle of it? And then you just have to go back. You'd be like, oh, I quit. I'm not a quitter. I have to do it again. I'm like, well, I already did half of it and that was really hard. I don't want to have to redo that. Because I mean, like, I don't know. I think that's normal. People kind of obsess on finishing things. Then they're like, if they quit, they're like, then they have to redo it. And it's like, well, maybe I don't want to redo it. I just want to finish and move on.
I also think sometimes the more you ride and get more in tune with yourself, it's easier sometimes to identify the problem. So sometimes you're riding along and you think it's like the worst moment ever, but actually you just need to stop and have like some proper food or like
totally
change your riding clothes if they're uncomfortable, or you can like sometimes just stop, sort it out, and then get going again. It's like a whole new ride.
Yeah, that's totally right. I mean, I have another friend who's like, well, if you feel horrible, just try something new, make some small change, eat a snack, put a layer on, whatever, like do one little thing different and see, did that change anything? Because then maybe you'll find what actually ends up working, I mean, or, try to finish your ride. And then a couple days after you finished, if you still think it was bad, don't do it again. I don't know. Maybe you don't ride like 300 kilometers because you don't like it. Stick with the 100K because maybe that's more enjoyable. It's like, don't continue with misery, but maybe you want to try it out once. And then I guarantee you'll just be like reflecting back on that ride and be like, I'm going to do it again. Because it's like nobody can stop. It's like just like kind of go into the zone, or it's like, I got to be back there because you want to get like back in your head in that place.
That's what happens every single time at the end. It's like you finish this like miserable ride or miserable race. It's like, and the next day I was like, oh, that wasn't that bad. Should we go back next year?
Yeah, exactly. And then halfway through the ride, you're like, why the hell did I decide to do this?
I guess, yeah, we're all on the same page.
So leading on actually from that quite nicely, someone's asking, Liz is asking, how do you normally prepare for a race? And I know you like to add on a few extra kilometers normally in the lead up.
Yeah. So if I have time, like I'll either ride to the start of the race or I'll ride the whole route before the race. If I have enough time, because it's good preparation to kind of know where resources are, know what the terrain's like, but it's also like great time to actually be there without kind of a demanding situation. It's like you can enjoy it. You can take breaks. You can meet people. You can do whatever you want. It's like a lot of freedom in the ride. And then I feel like that time, like the Silk Road, I rode, 2/3 of the route before the race. And then I'm like ready for riding at elevation and know what food I can eat and also get to know the place well. So putting a big or a long ride before a long race has always worked well for me. And then your body's just ready to spend long days in the saddle too. So I know not everybody has this much time, but it's definitely like I always want to add more rides onto the ride. It's like extend the adventure. I don't want to just like fly in and do a race. I want to be there for longer, especially if it's really far flight. I think like something about 6 weeks is the time that I really want to spend in a place to get more of a full feel.
What was your first ever like bikepacking adventure that you went on, and were there any real like lessons that you learned?
Oh, first bikepacking adventure. I mean, the first tour I went on was in 2008. And then it turned to dirt probably about 2 or 3 years later. And we were riding down in Baja, riding the main road down the peninsula, and then seeing all these dirt roads kind of shoot off. So we're like, oh, let's check out these dirt roads and make a connection to another road. And we were just on regular touring bikes. And I mean, it was terrible because the roads were super sandy. It was like just pushing your bike. So then you kind of learn like, well, maybe I want bigger tires. So then we go back like 5 years later with big mountain bikes, big tires, just to ride the dirt roads. So I guess the more you ride, like the more exposure you get, because then you start seeing like these offshoots of different places you could explore. And then I think the curiosity piece comes in where you're like, you want to see where they end up or if you can connect or get through. But yeah, I mean, I think some of the hardest parts are just getting out the door, feeling confident with your equipment, everybody has their kind of weak points. Like mine was definitely navigation. I'm terrible at navigation. GPS has been like a savior for me. I mean, I get lost in buildings, it's like I can't find my way around. Some people just have this like photographic memory of where the roads go. And for me, it's the opposite. I'm definitely following the line. But with that, it's like that's having GPS has given me more confidence to go more places because it's like, well, you won't be lost. I mean, you might be in the middle of nowhere, but generally you can get yourself out of there too. So I guess, yeah, having good equipment that you can rely on works. And then also realizing you can't prepare for everything. It's like if you brought spares of all your gear, then your bike would weigh like 300 pounds, so it's like just realizing, okay, things might fall apart, but there's always a solution to move on. And that's actually part of the adventure too. It might be a frustrating part at times, but it leads to something else.
I learned pretty quickly that tins of baked beans are not a good lightweight bikepacking.
I think I carried some of those down the Grand Canyon. Big mistake. That's so heavy. Oh.
Cool. Do you have any big bikepacking routes or events that are on your bucket list? Your bucket list.
I mean, I'm thinking about, with all events canceled and travel being limited, I'm thinking about going back to Alaska the next month to kind of continue a project I had there, riding all the roads in Alaska. So that's kind of my next upcoming thing. I rode that in 2017 for like a total of 4,500 miles. So there are still a couple more island roads I want to ride, but the idea this time would be to go back and have Rue there to document the project and then be able to share that with other people. So that's kind of the next thing coming up. And there are a couple islands there, Kodiak and Prince of Wales, that have a total of probably about 800 miles that I've just been so curious to ride for so long. Alaska's so wild, big animals everywhere, huge mountains, and then it's enormous. So the scenery changes so much. So to go back, ride some new roads, reride some old ones, and then document it and be able to share, that's kind of the next thing coming up for us. And then after that, I've no idea. It's one project to the next.
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask, do you have any good tips that you could share with people for when you're planning on Komoot, when you're planning your routes? Is there anything you particularly like to do?
I guess so, like for an initial plan, just putting in the start and the end, and then seeing what comes up from that. And then kind of looking closer at maybe parts of the route that I already know that I definitely want to make like specific routing options, changing that, but then also seeing like, because you might actually find some roads and trails that you didn't previously know about. So if it's closer to home, just starting to explore what's around you in a closer network, even if you do already have favorite routes, just to maybe try something different. And then actually, when I first started, there wasn't this multi-day planner, which has been super helpful. in planning rides from afar, because it's like, we know, we want to ride basically this amount per day. We'd like to stay, in a hotel if possible, and then just seeing the options from there. That's been really good too. And then that also makes it easier to break down kind of daily rides to have, just that route on GPS for that day. So that's been really helpful. Other than that, I'm just happy that it's pretty simple. I'm not much of a technology person.
Oh, sorry. Let's go back one. So I thought this was also like a super nice photo from your trip. Going back to Colombia for a moment. Were these just some local children that you met along the way?
Yeah, we actually got to this town. It's pretty funny. It's this town called San Francisco, and riding towards it, the previous towns before it, we were like, is there something here at this town? They're like, no, that doesn't exist. Everybody leading up to it said this town didn't exist. Then we ride into it at sunset, and it totally exists. It had like 3 stores, workers, families, and we get to this. We asked if there was somewhere we could camp, and the people pointed us to this outdoor kind of gymnasium complex that we could sleep under there in case it rained. We'd have protection. So we go there. We're like, oh, this is great. It's quiet, dark. We can just go to sleep. And then we get there, and then somebody turns on these like stadium lights, and it's all these little kids, and they have like a basketball, and they're running around, and they had access to the lighting, and they got us to play with them. And they were so super cute. They're all relatives, they're cousins and sisters. And then they're just so curious about what we're doing. They're like, what are you doing? Where are you going? Do you ever get tired? And then we had our dinner, and they're like looking at all our food, and then they want to eat it. And then they're telling us, what they do, what they eat, where their school is, and all this stuff. So they were super cute. This village, I don't think nobody knows it exists. So they definitely don't have visitors. But
it sounds like they want to keep it a secret.
So that was good.
So we've almost had an hour. Have you got time for a couple more questions, Lael? And then can wrap it up. Sammy, is there anything that you've come across in the Q&A that you want to fire away with?
There was a question set Europe or USA, but then we were talking about as well South America. So and then you also did like Kazakhstan, and you also traveled around all the world. So what would you choose? Like not choose, but which one you will say, okay, this one is one of the trips I'll definitely go back?
I'll definitely go back to Colombia. I don't know if I'll go back to Kyrgyzstan, but that was the most beautiful place I've ever ridden. It's fantastic. It's above tree line, just beautiful roads, very remote, but probably the most scenic place I've ever been. So if I had to say one amazing bike packing place, that would probably be it. But then I don't feel like I'll go back there, because I feel like I had such a good experience. I spent good time, and, I'm kind of ready to move on from that.
Yeah.
So I guess there are some places it's like, if you, make a community connection, then I'm more driven to go back, because there's like more of a project to continue with. And then Kyrgyzstan's like, I feel like the project is over. Riding in Alaska, that's my home. I'll never get tired of that. It's just fantastic. But I guess I'm always looking for dirt roads in the mountains, and that's where kind of my heart is. And that exists all over the world. So there are always options to find new places too.
I might come to that Alaska trip.
So cool, but not good food. It's like gas stations. That's it. And it's really expensive.
I can eat mac and cheese forever, no worries.
And for you, it's a dream.
There was another question. I had a question. Sorry, there's like clapping. I don't know if you hear, but I had another question. As I've been also traveling as well with a partner, how is you and Rui, like, how you guys two together 24 hours by 24 handle these things?
I mean, it's even if we're not traveling, we're always together. So I basically, like, this morning I went for a run for 40 minutes, and that's probably the only time I'll spend away from Rue and the whole day,
That's
know?
crazy.
So, but it's like, I'm so happy if we have extra time to tour a route before a race, because then she gets to see it too. Because then otherwise, often she'll do media, but then she misses the ride. So this Colombia project, it's like she was there for the whole thing on the bike. So I just want to do more projects like that. Like Alaska, she'll be there for the whole thing. It's like all these roads I already rode, but now she gets to come along and see them too, and then also document them. But then the only hard part is like, well, she has to carry all this camera equipment. So it's like putting that on a bike is so hard to do. It's like you can carry it in a backpack, but riding with a backpack is horrible. So then we're like, okay, well, maybe she'll have an e-bike and that'll help, because then she can get ahead. But then it's like, where are we going to charge an e-bike in the middle of nowhere in Alaska? So I don't know. It's like, but then it becomes like almost a game of like trying to line this up, strategy wise. It's like, well, can we actually do that? What's going to happen? And then I guess, I take a lot of risks with equipment. But generally bikes, things work out. An e-bike, a dead e-bike is just a heavy bike. You can still pedal it, still shift. Okay. So I think at that point, I'll just ride the dead e-bike.
All right. Yeah, one of the last questions for me. What will be the one and only bike?
Bike. I think it would be the bike I rode for the time trial in Colombia. It's a Specialized Epic hardtail, and that's with flat bar. And then I would ride that everywhere because it's super light, super capable. If I had to pick one, that'd be it.
That's the same as the Tour de Dubai last year, no?
Exactly, but I had a drop bar on it. But yeah, same bike. I mean, little changes. 1x drivetrain, great disc brakes. Like a powerhouse bike that's like weighs 20 pounds or something. I mean, that's it.
Cool. Okay, so Lael, I've got one last question just to wrap things up. Mm-hmm. What would you say is your favorite route planning app?
My favorite route planning app is Komoot.
You heard it from Lael. Okay. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. We're going to leave it there. Thanks, Lael, for taking the time to join us as well.
Thank you for tuning in, everyone. And excited to hear more about all of your adventures, and come ride in Colombia when things open up. It's really great.
Cool. And if anyone has any questions, or if anyone wants to ask anything about Komoot or find out more, my email address is just at the bottom, and feel free to drop me a message. All right. Thanks, everyone.